Hello, and welcome to the Diaries of Ordinary People, the podcast that brings you raw, unfiltered, and honest stories from everyday experiences. I'm your host, Ash, and each episode we dive into personal diaries and journals to uncover the heartfelt moments and challenges that connect us all. So, whether you're commuting, taking a break, or just winding down, join us as we explore real and authentic lives. This is the Diaries of Ordinary People. Hi Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Ash.
Good. It's nice to have you on. I think that I don't know, when I first thought about it, I was like, I need to have him on, but our paths just haven't managed to cross until now.
No, yeah, it's been good that we can finally do it, I would say. So,
Yeah, definitely.
And how many have you done? Like 3 or 4 now? So.
This will be the fourth one.
Okay,
nice. Yeah. And we're recording it on a Tuesday, but it'll come out in 2 weeks.
Fine, cool.
Yeah. So, you don't have to worry until 2 weeks from now.
I won't worry at all. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, I will never sit and listen to myself talk, ever. So,
Okay.
never going to happen. Well, there's been enough times in like music studios where we're recording, and obviously you'll be speaking,
Yeah.
and you'll hear yourself talking, and you'll be like, I never want to hear that again. So,
Where does your love for music come from?
I don't really know, actually. Probably just, I think it's something that either makes sense to you or not. So, my family weren't particularly musical, as in my parents weren't at all. They had like 4 cassette tapes that we used to listen to on the way down to Cornwall that was like the Beach Boys. My dad had like a country and western compilation thing. Dire Straits that everybody had in like the 80s. So I don't really know. It always just kind of made sense to me. Or rather, it didn't always make sense to me. Because when I was in primary school, I think my parents thought it would be good for us to learn an instrument, which is quite a common thing. It's like, right, the kids should be learning something. I got no idea why, but I had to learn the flute. And
Same.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, no, I think recorder.
Right, yeah. So I had the flute, and my brother was learning the clarinet. So it was just one of those things that they said, right, we should probably learn this. And as much as I love music now, it's sort of been my life really, I hated the flute. And I've never been good with lessons. I've never, ever. It's never been something that I've kind of enjoyed sort of doing. So as much as I tried to sort of, I'd go to the lessons and I'd participate. But obviously I had to do practice at home and stuff, and then my parents would be like, right, you need to do at least 15 minutes or something a day. And geniusly, or what I had worked out is that if I recorded myself on my little tape recorder, that I could just play it back and it would sound like I would. So that was the start of my recording career. Until they walked in like one day and it was playing.
You weren't even there.
No.
Yeah.
They were like, so what's going on? So that stopped. And then I didn't really do anything until my uncle is and was kind of an amazing jazz guitarist. So my cousins were like more musical. Like they learnt piano and trumpet and all this stuff. So I just used to noodle a bit when I went to their house. They had like a little Hammond organ things. So we just used to muck around, but that was it really. But I always liked music, always kind of listened to it. And I remember having a really like first emotional response. Like I remember the first time that I heard something and like it made me want to cry, and I was only 6 years old or 8 years old or something. a 10cc song, and I was just like, I didn't even know what the emotion was, but I was like, oh right. And then because my brother was older than me by 2 years, I used to get music like drip fed to me, because his friends would get music. They'd get introduced to really cool music before we did, because they were older, basically. But so we'd get their little mixtapes and stuff.
Yeah.
And then my brother took me to see a gig when I was probably 14 or something. And that just
opened your eyes.
That was it. I was like, I want to do that. Whatever that is, I sort of want to do that. And then that was when I started playing drums, because I just saw grunge was kind of happening and stuff, and I would always watch the drummers. I'd never played, but I was a bit like, oh, I think I could do that. I could just I think I can roughly do that. And it always used to be the thing that I'd listen to when I was listening to stuff. So that was it, really. So then got a drum kit from my mum's manager, who used to be a drummer, who had just a drum kit in the garage, from like 1983, and it's all in sort of bits. So that was kind of my project. I've always been quite project minded, so I was like, right, I'll fix up that drum kit, or I'll learn that, or I'll do that. And that was it. And then my poor neighbours had to sit and listen to me learning drums. But again, I didn't have any lessons. I just was like, I'd listen to stuff and then I'd try it. And I'm not some amazing drummer. I can play the drums.
So humble.
I wish I'd had lessons. This is the thing. I wish I'd been forced to sort of be like, right, at 14, because you've got loads of time.
Yeah.
And then it's in you. I did actually try and have some lessons on drums when I was about 32, and had like 3 lessons, and was like, yeah, cool. I've sort of learnt some stuff, but it doesn't interest me. Lessons.
Yeah.
If you give me an instrument and give me 3 hours, I'll get something out of it. It might not be right, but I'll get something out of it.
Yeah.
That I would consider interesting. And then that's it. And so then music was always it. It was like, right, well, whatever I do in life, I will always do that. But it's grown as I've got older. Like, my love for it has grown. Because then you're just, you learn an instrument, you join a band, you just want to be in a band, then you want to play live, then you play live, then you want to record an album, then you record an album, and you're not very good. And then you're either one of those people that then continues with it, or you get to 25 and 30 and then real life happens and then it veers off. So because we've never had kids, our focus has always been, well, we just do music. And then it opens up a whole world where you're meeting other musicians, and you can meet a musician from any country, and you've automatically got a jargon. I guess if you met another gymnast.
Yeah.
You've got the
just
jargon.
Happens.
You just know exactly how to communicate in your own language. And then we always used to joke. There used to be this thing about like, play guitar, will travel. And then, so I was just a drummer basically, and then I joined Evie's band. And then I started to learn guitar when I was about 30. So then we could just do gigs, the two of us, because then I was kind of playing the guitar in a slightly weird way. And then we started to travel with it and tour, and then it gets exciting, and then you start to make albums and other albums, and then that's it. So yeah, it's always been my thing. It's what I do. It's just whatever you want to call it, if it's your calling or your thing. But it's like, if I wasn't doing it, or if I don't do it, I feel like, why am I alive?
Okay.
it's a, without it, there's quite an existential crisis of like, why am I alive? Do you know what I mean? So, and you've only got to read that Rick Rubin book or Stephen Pressfield book, The War of Art, which is all about like what the muse is and how you tune into it and where that inspiration comes from, and you know. And I can probably waffle on about this for hours, but it's like, what's interesting, I think, for me, is how a certain chord progression will make sense to me, but someone else would play something completely different that would make sense to them, and those notes in that order would sound right to them, and it would probably sound wrong to me. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know what that comes from. It either comes from music that you've listened to your whole life, or it comes from some intrinsic thing that you can't explain, because obviously music is frequencies and vibrations and something. So are we is the chord progression that I would love the result of 300 million years of DNA that someone else kind of loved? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got no idea. But I think it also depends on what you listen to. So if you listen to jazz when you're 15, then you'll be like, okay, that's my thing. But sometimes you hear music and it just makes sense to you, like at that precise moment in your life.
You mentioned earlier about your kind of one of your first experiences with music, you being 5 or 6. Is that like your first kind of memory that you remember, or?
No, I'm not sure what my first memory would be. Really, I've got a bit of a flash of a memory from being a kid, like 3 or 4 years old, and just being like at what we used to call our breakfast room in the house that we grew up, and just being in a chair at the dining table with my family. I've just got like a little snippet of that. But earliest memory, I don't really know. I haven't got a great memory of things, actually. Certain things I'm really good with, like faces and stuff. Like if I meet someone, like I remember their face, but I might remember their name. Like I've got friends that can list off actors' names all the time, and I'm like, what? And I'm like, yeah, it's that bloke that was in that other thing that we saw. It's like, it doesn't mean anything.
Like that famous painting in that famous place.
Yeah. But I guess, when you're really young, it's like memories of school. And I guess for me, so I had a speech impediment when I was a kid, quite a bad one. So one of my earliest memories really was the realization that, I can't do that, and going, right, that's going to be a problem. That's going to make life quite hard, especially when you're young, because you haven't got a clue, so you're still sort of trying to learn who you are, and then suddenly you find out that you can't really talk properly, and that's kind of quite weird. That's quite weird. So I remember that, and I must have been 4.
Wow.
Because I remember trying to say something and it not coming out, and going, what's that? And then from then on, it's been like, okay, that's what life is. Do you know what I mean? But lots of people have it when they're kids and they grow out of it, or they learn to manage it, and then some unfortunate people, it never improves, and it's just awful, and their life is fucking hell. Do you know what I mean? Thankfully, mine improved a bit, or you kind of managed to work out how to
navigate around it. Almost.
Work around it, yeah. It's quite a hard thing to explain. I don't think it's ever been explained that well in the literature that is written about it as well. Not that I've spent any time in the last 20 years reading about it. But when I was younger, I used to, is there like an answer to this thing? Like,
yeah, of course.
Is there a cure to?
Yeah, it was like impactful in your mind. It was full frontal. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're at school, it's horrible. It makes life hard because you've got a stutter or a stammer, and they make you read in front of a classroom. And then
that's got to be tough.
And then suddenly you're like, oh, humiliation, embarrassment, anger, frustration, and you're 6 years old. So it's like,
yeah.
So I've never read anything that's kind of explained, and I still don't know why. I read kind of semi recently that they think it might even be a genetic mutation.
Oh, okay.
So that's what the research is on at the moment. But anyway, so that was probably my earliest memory. But I was sporty as a kid, like really sporty. Sport was my thing before I got into music. So I was just always playing football or whatever sport was happening.
Yeah.
That was what I was doing, basically. So, so that's probably my earliest memory, I think.
Cool. We spoke quite a lot about how you've been in your early childhood. What would you say the past 12 months to 24 months, past year or two, how have they been?
They've kind of been quite good in a way. In one way, it's been quite stressful in a few scenarios, but also kind of I don't know, reached almost a not sure what the word is going to be. It's not contentment, because that's not the right word. Maybe a comfortableness, and that's not a word either. But just where things are kind of like work has been, work had reached a point where it's a thing. It's a business. It kind of runs now, and I know what to do, and I've got the right people involved, so I'm less anxious about, oh God, I'm not sure about that. Now I've sort of, and maybe through a few more years of working, you get the experience where you're just like, I've never done that before, but we'll just work it out. And musically, it's been the most furtive time of my life. Like, I've written more music in the last 2 years than I have done in my entire life, probably. So it's been good, because I guess that's how I judge myself. Like,
what, on music?
Musical output.
Okay.
Really. So I've kind of been doing new stuff and trying out some new things, and and that's been good. So that's been wholesome and fulfilling, and it's either linked to doing mushrooms 2 years ago or not, but I think it sort of did. I think I went down to Totnes maybe 2 years ago, and I had a month where it was just me and the dogs, and I had lots of time to just noodle with music, and I was kind of microdosing some psilocybin and stuff as well, kind of at the same time that Rick Rubin brought out his book, and it was all about, like, again, about creativity and what it is and how you tune into it, and sort of, it's quite hard to explain. It's like I'd sort of just gone, oh, actually, this is what I do, with a confidence. And it's not that I'm an amazing musician, that's not what I'm saying, but intellectually, or more, what's the word? I guess how you structure it in your own mind. Because I've always been, from about the age of 30, I've always considered myself a musician. Prior to that, you're just like, sort of trying out stuff.
A person.
And, yeah. And then it's like, oh, right. Actually, I remember having a conversation with Evie after a gig in London when we'd only been playing for a few years, and we had done a really, I don't know, good show, and she was like, what we're doing is important, and this is the thing. And it kind of refers back to something in the Rick Rubin book, which is about how you classify yourself. And it's like, either as an artist or a musician, and it's like, is this a hobby or is this your life?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And there is a difference. Like, I know people that do music and it's a little hobby. It's like, we do it and it's serious. We might not be Ed Sheeran. But that's the other thing. There are thousands of bands, thousands, that are touring, that are making a living or not, but they're doing it, and you'll never hear of them. But they're all doing it. They're all getting in vans and they're driving out and they're playing out, and that's their thing. And it's like, so there's a reward in just kind of doing that, I think. So I think the last 2 years have kind of been a time of growth, I suppose you would say. And things have all just been like, kind of feel like they're kind of moving somewhere, even like other stuff like trying to eat well and the gym and all this stuff. It's all sort of been a bit more like intentional. I guess that's the word. So yeah.
Nice.
So
you mentioned about doing a gig in London. I know you lived in London, or you worked in London for a while. Can you tell me about your time in London?
Yeah. So I grew up in Orpington, so we were on like the suburbs really. But the thing with Orpington, there's like a 50-minute fast train into London. So whenever we got to the age where we could go to London, we started to go to London. And then it opens up a whole other world of music and arts. And so all the gigs that we were lucky enough to go to when we were teenagers, we could really do it because that was where we grew up. So London was always a place that we used to go to, but and then I guess I started working in London after university, or even prior to university. Yeah, just sort of weird jobs that you pick up when you're 16 and sort of 18. So I got a job at St Martin's in the Fields, which is basically the cathedral on Trafalgar Square, just through someone that I knew through, I don't remember where, school or something. And we were the stewards for the classical music concerts in the evenings.
Wow.
Which, looking back, was amazing. At the time, you're a bit like, yeah, sure, whatever. And we just had to like either do security or light candles or whatever else, or check the tickets and stuff. But it's classical music. It's like mostly old people. But it was amazing because the concert would start and you just sit there and you get 2.5 hours of like Vivaldi and Mozart and stuff that I wasn't familiar with at all. Because I was sporty, I never did music technically, as in I didn't do music GCSE or A-level because I was into sport, so that kind of directed my thing. But I was always doing music, but I never had the confidence as a music student because you could only really do that if you were learning cello or sort of piano and stuff. So anyway, yeah, so London was always a place of work or a place of going out, really. So, and then we got into clubbing, and London was amazing for that. And then moved to London. My first flat was in New Cross Gate. So then I kind of lived in London, worked in London, got a job in the city, and then suddenly you're in a suit in the city, and then you see a completely new side of London, which is office working, pubs, and that whole like network of like it's a whole other world basically. but I always found it quite interesting. I've always had quite a interest in like old school London, kind of like Victorian eras, and then all, you know, like the craze and stuff. It was always fascinating, like sort of inner London and whatever else. And sometimes we'd get a cab home from a club, especially in like the early 90s or like mid 90s. And you'd get an old school taxi driver and they'd be driving through like central London and pointing out, and this is where the craze were, and this is, you know, it was always just sort of fascinating, really. And then that was it. And then we started playing in London music, and then you suddenly get very comfortable with what sort of London is. Now I haven't, you know, I've been in Hastings for 7 years, I think, maybe 8 years. So now if I go back to London, I just feel like a tourist. In quite a nice way, and I'm like, oh well, that's new, or like, oh well, but I'm glad I did it. I miss it in some ways. I miss having access to like everything all the time, really good gigs, and it would take me a lot now to be like, right, I'm going to drive up to London to see a band that I like. I'd have to really like them. Do you know what I mean? But saying that, there's a lot happening in Hastings too that is just on a smaller vibe. So, but yeah, I liked London.
Why did you leave?
I think we had just had enough, really. Also, we'd moved out of London, Evie and I bought my family home.
Oh.
So I bought my family house, which was kind of quite nice. So we ended up being there for about 8 years, and we had, I think I had sort of, I'd hoped that I could have got out of the city job by the time that I turned 40, because I didn't want to be a lifer in an office job. There's people that are really into it. So I ended up working in finance and trading companies accidentally, because that doesn't interest me in the slightest. But you work with some people that have been to university specifically for that reason. So for them, it's like they've arrived. This is their job, and
that's their path.
It's like, right, so like, what can I learn and what's the end job? I was a bit like, the money's great, but
the job isn't.
I'm a member of Greenpeace, but I'm working for Gazprom.
Yeah, right, fair enough.
What's happening here? Do you know what I mean? And there was always that split. Right, we'd be playing at a festival at the weekend. On a Sunday night, we'd be at the after party with loads of musicians and like hippies, and oh my god, this is amazing. And then Monday morning I'd be in a suit in Canary Wharf going, which I quite like the split, because it was quite interesting to sort of do the two, if you know what I mean. But I'd always had an end game of like, it would be good to do something else, really, and we wanted to buy a house here. At that time, the market was much cheaper here than London. Not many people were moving in at that stage, so a lot of the old houses were just wrecks and like ready to be fixed.
Is your family house in Hastings?
No, it was in Orpington.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah. So we ended up selling that and moving to Hastings, mostly because Evie's mum had, again, moved to Hastings sort of accidentally, because it was the only place that she could afford. And we were renovating her house at the weekend, so Evie and I would come down to Hastings, and I hadn't been to Hastings for like 30 years, and we'd be fixing the house up for in the day, and then we'd go out on the Saturday night or the Friday night, and we'd be like, oh, hang on, this is really nice here, like sort of like a secret little gem. And then we started to look at the market, and a lot of the houses here were cheap and they needed work, and that was what we wanted to do. We wanted to like
fixer upper.
Fix up an old house, really. And there was all these beautiful Victorian houses that had just been left, that they hadn't been ruined either, and that's the key thing, because the town was quite poor, still is really. Developers hadn't moved in and just like made loads of flats.
Yeah.
So even this place is still a house.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we just ended up kind of thinking, well, maybe we'll move to Hastings and try that out. And I'd started labouring in my last year when we were living closer to London. So I had an inkling of maybe I could sort of do some landscaping or stuff in Hastings. So yes, so my last year close to London, I was doing 4 days a week in a city job. And then Friday, Saturday, I was labouring for 80 quid a day. But I loved it. So I was like, right, I think I can do that in Hastings. So then it was just how to kind of move here and start a company. So that was it, really.
And what do you do in Hastings now? Do you still labour, or do you have your own company, or what?
Well, as you know, Ash. So, yes, run a landscaping company now, which is good. Which I guess has been going for about 6 or 7 years-ish. But, yeah, it's been the last 3 or 4 years where it's kind of reached a point where it's like, okay, this is the thing, and we're doing some good work, and we're proud of what we do, and we're not just like smashing through it. We're kind of trying to sort of put ourselves into the job as much as we can. So so it's good.
What are your core values?
Core values, probably, hopefully, I would assume the same as what most people have, but sort of, I guess, integrity is a big one. Having character, I know that's not a trendy thing at the moment, but I think kind of, I think that you should be honest as much as you can be, and that's easier said than done, because half the time you've got to be honest with yourself, and it's really quite easy to not be. I think being honest and truthful, I've always been pretty laid back, to the frustration of a lot of people that I know. But life has never been too stressful for me. I've always kind of known that I was going to be all right. Do you know what I mean? I've sort of got that resilience, I guess you'd say. But that's what I've sort of got this it's not an old school London geezer code, but it sort of is.
Kind of is.
It sort of is, handshakes, looking in the eye, kind of being truthful, not being an idiot, being reliable. If someone asks for something, that's what you do. If someone says this time, you make sure that you're there on time. If someone buys you a beer, you buy them a beer. It's very straightforward. This is how you are, and if you're not that, you're like, oh, well, that's just rude, or that's like trying to be self-aware. I think that's it.
Sounds like respect is really high on your list as well.
Yeah, it is. And other people's behaviour varies wildly, obviously. And you know if you agree with something or not, because you get the feeling.
Yeah.
So it's trying to be, loyalty as well. I think it's a word that gets chucked out a lot, but I think I'd like to think that I'm extremely loyal to people. And just being helpful, do you know what I mean? So, and I think I'm sort of that. If my phone goes and it's a few people that I know, most of the time it's like, hey, can you help me? Or, hey, I need a favour. And I'm like, sure. So that's the sort of person that you kind of want to be.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because I hate asking for stuff. I'm terrible at it. I'm really bad at saying, I need help with this. It sort of irks me. Because I've always been quite independent in that way. But yeah, that's the one bit that I'm trying to get a bit better at, is just saying, I need help with this. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
It's really hard to ask for help.
Yeah, I've just never been good at it. Yeah. So probably that, I think. Yeah, I mean, what else would people say for core values?
Well, the last guest I had on was along the same lines. They said trust, honesty, and integrity was theirs. And the guest before was they went so deep into honesty. Like I think we had they just spoke to me for about 20 minutes on honesty. I think you're right. I think that the kind of respect, honesty, and like trustworthiness are like a little triangle.
Yeah.
And without those three things, or even if one point goes, you kind of can't really do it.
Yeah, and there's just I think if things, most of the time, if things are really upfront and communication has been really clear, there's usually no problems.
Yeah.
It's when there's been a bit of an assumption about something and it hasn't been communicated, and there's been a bit of that lately. Even with friends, and you're just like, that's just not cool, and then you either have to be the person that points that out, hopefully not in a shitty way, but you say, look, as your friend, I'm going to tell you from my side, this is how I viewed this. Because often you get their side and you either have the energy to be like, actually that's not how it was. Do you know what I mean? But obviously everyone's seeing things from their perspective, and I forget who I was chatting to the other day, but it's like, I imagine, the way that I imagine it is every single person that you meet turns up with this invisible suitcase of their whole life experience, every interaction they've ever had, if they've lost friends, if they've had a stressful thing, everyone turns up, put their suitcase down, but you don't know what's in it until you've had the conversation. And that might take years. You might know someone for 15 years if you're like, oh, right, okay, I see why that's, right, fine. So that's the interesting part of it, I think, is we're all seeing our life through our own eyes. And it varies wildly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you could ask 5 people who saw the same thing what happened, and there'd be 3 answers that would be like, really? That's not how I saw that, but cool. So,
when you look forward to the next, or even when you just look forward for your musical career, or like how the landscaping company is going to go, what do you see for them?
I've been trying to visualise good things, actually, in terms of music, which I don't think we, even like, or myself personally, have been very good at previously, because we've had quite a few stressful moments, as you do through musical stuff, studios or this or that, or sort of people. And we had quite a lot of stress early on our first record. So everything we do now, we've already got our backs up. Do you know what I mean? So, but now we're like, well, I think we're both like, actually, I think we're confident in the stuff that we're doing at the moment. Musically is good, you know. Like, I can honestly say, like, as subjectively or as objectively as possible, which is all that you're trying to do when you're like, once you've done something and then you're trying to mix it and trying to finish it, is you're almost trying to be like, I'm not connected to this in any way.
Yeah.
Is this still good? Like, is there merit in this, even though I've made some sounds on it? And I think I can objectively say that's good, and I'm proud of that, which is all that I can ask for, really. And work-wise, is just continuing. It's going to be one of those jobs where every year you learn something new, and yeah, we've had some really nice clients. The way that we're kind of running things now seems to be working. So I'm already, it's not that I'm thinking about what am I going to do next, but I am a bit, and that might not happen for 5 years, but I'm nearly at the stage where I'm kind of project managing the jobs and doing less of the work.
Like the physical side?
Yeah, okay. Or I'm kind of like choosing which bits I want to do now, which is kind of nice, because there's some things I like doing and some things I don't like doing. And then I think there'll be a decision at some point, because if it keeps going, then you reach the point where you're either like, right, am I now just project managing and that's my job? So the jobs are just running and I'm just turning up saying, right, you need to do that, you need to do that. Who's there tomorrow? Right, fine. And I'm off and I'm on to the next quote or something. To keep expanding, or it almost feels like this is the limit where that I've been trying to get to, which is you've got jobs booked, you're busy, you might end up with 2 or 3 jobs on at the same time, but not all at the same time, and that's fine. And then you can make a living from it. Everyone else can sort of make a living from it, from the people that are working for me, and that's fine. And then it just continues. Or you get to a stage where you're like, right, I'm going to get 4 vans and 15 people, and I'm not sure that's the way to do it. Do you know what I mean? Because I think then you lose a bit of control on how things are run, and I've got a clear idea of the sorts of people that I want working for me, the sort of attitude that it should be on site, and I guess the ideals of the company. And as things get bigger and bigger, you lose a bit of control of that. So I think if it can keep going and I can reach a stage where maybe then I'm sort of doing slightly less physical work, but it's still running, and I've got a bit more time to then just do that and sort of music and whatever else, and that feels like a sort of good way to spend a life. And then maybe in 5 years I'll be like, right, I'm going to do something else, because I think I'm massively into people changing jobs. Massively. I respect it hugely, and I think it should almost be compulsory that you get to 40 and you're like, now do something else, and then you get to 50 and like, now do something else, because you learn so much more and it forces you out of your really kind of if you've been in a corporate job for 15 years...
You get tunnel vision, won't you?
You get tunnel vision, you're so comfortable. You don't get sacked if you're in a corporate job, not really. It's very hard. And there's thousands of people that are in corporate jobs and they're coasting, and that's fine. If that's what you want to do with your life and you've got a family and work to you is just money, then that's fine. I completely respect that. But you are missing out on just being like, oh, right, I'm just going to change my life.
Yeah.
And it might not be the easiest thing to do and blah, blah, blah. But I think, yeah, whenever I meet people and they're like, oh, yeah, I used to do this and then I changed it, I'm like, props for that. Because you had to walk out and be like, I'm going to do something else. And when you're in your 20s, that's all you're doing, because you're trying out things and you'll do that for a year and, right, I'll do that for 3 years. But when you're in your 40s or you get to 40 and you're like, I'm going to change my life, then it's quite a big deal. So, but yeah, I haven't kind of worked out what my next thing is going to be. So we'll see.
Do you see the next 12 months staying relatively similar to what's going on? Kind of maybe dropping an album or something along those lines? Or
Yeah. The next year is just that. We're already kind of, I guess that's how we sort of, maybe that's how my brain works. It's like, right, sort of, what's the output? So yeah, some singles. We're working on a fourth album that's relatively nearly finished, and already working on other stuff and another project. So just trying to continue and be as productive as I can while I feel productive, because that may change. But the last year, 2 years, I think it's just I made a decision that every night I'm doing music. That's it. So, and I'm trying to be quite hard with that. So people are like, hey, do you want to come out for beers? And I'll be like, sometimes. And then sometimes I'm like, no, actually, because
you're doing music.
I'm doing music, and I'm not just doing music. I'm doing music. And it is about time. It's about sitting down and doing the work, as they call it. So you might sit there for 6 hours and you might not get anything. Or you might not be inspired one night, but you might sit and listen to what you've done, or you might go through the hard drive and you might find something from 3 years ago that now you know how to finish. We've got probably 300 ideas on a hard drive from 15 years that we're like, oh. And then occasionally you'll find one, you'll be like, well, that little bit's quite cool, actually.
Do you find time to stop and rest in all that? It seems pretty hectic.
Yeah, I have plenty of time, actually. Because we haven't got kids, if I want to have a nap at 4 o'clock, I'm having a nap at 4 o'clock. And to be honest, because I'm sort of at that age, well, I'm 48, I think. Most of my friends have got kids or young teenage kids. So they're all into that stuff. My weekends are basically like, so I've got to walk the dogs and maybe go to the gym and do music. So my social life is sort of my work, is also my social life. I'll still see my friends, but now it's like once a month, once every 2 months or something. So I can be quite disciplined in music, but I can also be very disciplined in having time off. Do you know what I mean? So, and there might be some nights where I start music, but I only do half an hour. I'll still class it as I've done
music, this sort of thing, yeah.
There's plenty of time to watch Netflix, so so that's fine, you know. But the gym is good too. I mean, that's kind of, I see that as like relaxation as well, really. I know you're exercising, but because of the sauna and the ice tub thing now, it's like that just resets your brain.
You're going to the gym to sit in the sauna. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. Yes, that's all that's happening basically. So,
do you regret anything? Like, you seem kind of, since we've been talking, you seem like you've had like methodical reasoning for everything. Is there something you're like, oh shit, I fucked that up?
Oh, I regret loads of stuff.
Like?
Well, I hear people say, oh, you should never regret anything. No, because, it sort of made you who you are today. And it's like, yeah, that is true. But I've done some things in my younger years that I'm not particularly proud of. Hurting people. Not physically hurting people. I mean, like...
Good save.
Yeah. I mean, not being that great to other people sometimes.
Like emotionally and like...
Yeah. Not being a great friend. Not being a great boyfriend, travelling and meeting lots of people and, sort of... So there's not a lot of things that I regret, but I think if you sit there and say you don't regret anything, either you've been amazing and you've, at every point where you've had to make a decision, you've miraculously made the right decision. I can look back and say, yeah, I wasn't that cool with that person. I should have treated that person a bit better. Should I have thought about that a bit longer before I made that decision? Possibly. It's like, does it change anything? Not really, but yeah, if I was to repeat some of the situations that I've been in, I would make a slightly different decision than I probably made. But I think that's what you get with age, because when you're 26 in Australia, who gives a shit? So yeah, I think you do get older, and it's not that I regret my life, because I don't. I'm happy with, things. But yeah, there's always work to do on yourself. You can always be a better human being. You can always do more. But you've got to have the motivation, or you've got to have the inner strength to be able to do that stuff sometimes. And it's also about, I think, giving yourself some slack sometimes. Like, there'll be times when I'll think of stuff that I've done, even recently, and I'll be like, oh my God. Just for like half a minute, going like, what? Like, yeah, just like eyes rolling, going like, really? Was that what you chose? Like, interesting choice. And obviously, it was probably made at the time because you were feeling a certain way and you needed some kind of validation from that person or whatever. So, but equally, I think life's about not being too hard on yourself as well. Or you'll never do anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
what are you scared about in the future, if anything?
I don't know. I've always just had this inkling that I was gonna live until I was old.
Just gonna win at life.
Yeah, I'm just gonna win. No, like, I've just always had this thing like, I think I'm gonna live for quite a while. Obviously, that may not happen, but I've just always had this slight kind of sense that, like, so what am I scared? I'm not sure I'm scared of anything. Am I scared of getting old? In some ways, yeah. I'm aware of it. Like, since I've got to like mid-40s, things do start.
Does life catch up?
Breaking. Yeah, like, physically, you're like, oh shit, I used to be able to do that, and now I can't do that. I know I'm quite fit and healthy, and that's why. But, you know, you start to get old. Your hair starts falling out. Your muscle mass changes. Your body changes. It's like, you get tired. Do you know what I mean? So, and, you know, you've only got to be like, wow, and that's now. What about when you're 75? Like, oh my God. But what am I scared of? I'm not scared of anything, actually. Not really. Am I scared of dying? I do think about, maybe because I am quite a fan of THC and marijuana, I do think about things quite a lot. Probably more than I should do, I imagine. But I do think about end of life, and I spend a lot of time thinking about what this is, actually.
As in, like, life in general, or like right now?
Everything. Like, why are we here? How are we here? What happens next? You know, you've only got to lose a parent or someone close to you, and you end up with a lot of questions that you don't get answers for. Yeah. And no one has those answers, and that's okay. And you can't live your life thinking about that stuff, because you wouldn't do anything. But it's interesting how a lot of people don't think about it at all. Just like, oh, right, so life's like, right, okay, job, kids, okay, and that's it. And it's just like, okay, potentially we're spinning on a planet in the middle of some kind of universe that we don't really know what it is. We definitely don't know how it's here, and all of the theories still don't really explain anything. And it's not like I think that we're in the Truman Show and that it's all like a...
Imagine the whole universe in the Truman Show.
Yeah, and that we're in some simulation that we're then going to come out of and go, oh my God, wow.
Keanu Reeves just congratulates us.
Yeah. Red pill. Red pill. But it's fascinatingly weird. Like that when my mum died and I was with her, she was there, as in you can sense that the person's there.
Yeah.
And then they die and you know that they're not there. As in that bit where they die and then they move into a different room, and then other family arrive, and then you have to go into that room, and you're just like, well, that's just a body now, isn't it? That fascinates me. And obviously doing psychedelics a little bit, you're like, well, what's that? Is that where we go to? Is this other consciousness that we've got no idea about? And I think ultimately the answer is we don't know, and we will probably never know, and our brains haven't got the capacity to understand it, because we see time as this linear thing, and maybe it isn't, and who knows, and what the fuck, and so but I'm not scared of anything. I'm a resilient human being, and I've always had a bit of a confidence that things will work themselves out, mostly, and they mostly have. But yeah, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about it. But
it was interesting that you brought it up, but only when I asked what you were if you were fearful of anything. Like, you mentioned about like kind of drugs and stuff. Like, where did they kind of first start in your life?
So I guess, well, I see alcohol as a drug as well. I know that it's obviously legal and everyone can do it, and we could walk out of this house now and walk into an establishment and they serve us until we had a fight and vomited and fell over, and and that's legal. So alcohol was probably my first drug, as I would
Yeah.
define it. And it really had its use because at the time, the thing with having a speech problem is if you have a few beers,
Does it go away?
you're way more fluent.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was when I started drinking, especially my generation, it was all about drinking. It was like, when are we going to start drinking? When can we start drinking? Where can we get alcohol from? That was it. That was our whole thing when we were teenagers. Now it seems to be all like, how can we be more productive? And da-da-da. We were like, whose parents were away? How much of the drinks cabinet can we drink before they realise?
Two good questions to ask.
Yeah. So alcohol was a friend to me because it really lifted me out of myself to be a bit more gregarious and meet people and have more confidence. Kind of, courage, as they would say. So, and obviously, and I drank for 20 years because I liked it. But other drugs just kind of crept in as an interest. I was always just really interested in them. I remember having, when I was a student, the Independent, sorry I keep knocking that, the Independent newspaper. This is when I was a student, so like 1996. And they were trying to have a petition to legalise weed. But they had a centre spread of like all of the recreational drugs and what they do and, pros and cons. Because obviously they all have a knock-on effect. But it just interested me. And I'm probably not alone because I'm a bit of a hippie and I was into music and alternative music. So it was all wrapped up in that as well because it's all the same sort of thing. It's like if you're into Jimi Hendrix, then you probably smoke weed a bit. Like,
It's a logical thought.
Because it's all sort of connected and it's like, it amplifies your listening experience if you're a bit stoned, let's say. You'll hear things in a slightly different way. But I guess my generation was just that. And then when we kind of came out of university, well, there were like musical movements that were very tied to certain drugs. So acid house had happened and ecstasy and MDMA was a massive thing. Then drum and bass came out and that had its own sort of drugs really. And then electronic music had this sort of drug, or if you were into like goth music, then they were all drinking like cider and taking speed or whatever. They all had their own little thing. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that I've done loads of drugs, but I experimented with a fair few sort of growing up, and then but we got into clubbing, so ecstasy was our thing for a period of time, and it's brilliant. It was just brilliant. Like, yes, it had some side effects, and no, I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. But we had some of the best nights of our life. Like, me and my friends had some of the best nights of our life that we will always be like, that was one of the best nights of our life. So, and obviously music and festivals and drugs, it's all, intermingled, but obviously you've got to be careful. And I've always had this, and maybe that was my upbringing and my parents being very anti everything. I've always had a bit of like an off switch, but where I can be like, nah. Even drinking, like I've got a cut off point. Especially now, I don't really drink now, but even then, I'd reach a point and be like,
"That's me done.
I've had enough." Like, and obviously there'd be some nights when you'd have a bit too much, and then you're ill, or you wake up outside a club on the pavement, and you're like, "Oh, I've just fallen asleep on the pavement outside a club. That's probably, maybe don't do that again."
Maybe.
Yeah. Whereas we all had friends that had no
limit or like filter kind of thing.
No like stopping point.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I also, that all sounds like, yeah, I was really into everything. I made a decision when I was 18 that I would never do cocaine and never do heroin. Because I knew that heroin was bad. We all knew that because we were all into grunge and it was killing loads of our favourite musicians. And I said that I'd never do cocaine because I knew I'd be a nightmare on it. I just knew, because it would make me super confident and arrogant. And some of my friends got into that in their 20s, and even being around it, I was a bit like, oh yeah, no, you're just being a bit of an arsehole now. So I've never done that. I'm glad. I'm glad of that. So it's always been like the softer stuff, really. So, yeah.
Do you think as you've kind of grown up and you've gone through all these stages, your view of like, so like you said about when you were kind of started clubbing in London and stuff and like being on ecstasy and stuff, those are like some of the best nights of some of those were the best nights of your life. Do you think like your expectations or kind of like your view on like what you consider to be like good or make you happy has changed as you've grown? And what is it now?
I don't know actually. I think the thing about it is, the thing about what clubbing was, when clubbing was good, it was about community and you felt like you were part of something. Because on the whole, everybody in that club would be more or less on the same sort of drugs. So you felt like you were part of something. That's it. That's all that it really is community. Because it's that sort of drug. Obviously, there's other drugs that are like solo, sit in a room, smoke crack. I'm not going to...
Yeah.
Not that I've done that. So, but would I consider that, has that changed? Probably not. If I could feel like I was part of a group or part of a community now, I wouldn't have to be off my face, but if I felt like I was part of something, part of the greater good, part of something higher than ourselves, then that would be, yeah, I'd feel like that was an enjoyable time. But honestly, I don't really need to do much to have an enjoyable time anymore. Like, just chilling out I love it. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I'm slightly introverted, I'm really happy just being on my own, like with my own time, and then choosing when to go out. I'm happy to go out, but I have to feel really like I sort of have to be like energized for that. If I'm out all the time, I sort of lose my thread a bit, and I'm a bit like, oh man, I'm just like so tired.
Do you still feel like you're part of the community now?
Yeah. I guess I think what's the shame is that well, it's natural these days, but is that your friends that you grow up with, you know, that you're really tight with, you might have like 4 or 5 like really tight friends. That changes because obviously people move away now. It's not like maybe if you grew up in the 70s, you'd still sort of be in the same town.
Yeah.
You'd be much more part of their lives. The kids would just be in and out the house. It'd all be one sort of thing. And I think we've lost that generally as a society. That's not happening now.
Yeah.
You know, let's say your parents aren't just round the corner, your brother's not half a mile away, your auntie's not just round the corner. You can't all just be like part of people's lives in a way that's quite easy. That's how I've always quite liked being part of my family, is just being around it. I'm all for it, like, hey, let's meet up in 3 months' time and have a meal and all that. That doesn't really work for me. I'm much better in like if we were really close by, and it'd be like cups of tea, I take the kids to football, da 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 da. Do you know what I mean? Like that sort of community. So I think we've lost that. However, saying that, I feel like I'm part of a community at work because we've got a small crew of people and we're always chatting and we're friends anyway. So, and then I've got my music stuff, and that does feel like a community at times, most of the time. Although you'll get long periods where you're not playing or you're not seeing anyone, and then it can feel quite a insular pastime, let's put it that way. Yeah, and I guess it's not that I've got we've got friends here, so we can see people, and we do see people, but yeah. And I think that's why I like Hastings, is that it does feel like a bit of a community in that it's small enough to be a community. You can meet the same person again accidentally. It's not like, hey, you're really cool, and then if you meet someone really cool in London, let's say, just through like you've got to exchange, you've got to plan. Whereas here you're like, oh, if I meet you once, I'm definitely going to see you in the bread shop at some point because it's that small.
Because it's Hastings, and that's the bread shop. Yeah.
So that is sort of quite nice. So, yeah.
Are you happy now?
Yeah, I sort of am actually. I think happiness is a weird term because I'm not sure what happiness is really. I think that blends into contentment, fulfillment, that sort of stuff. But yeah, and I think even if I'm not, sometimes, like I'm sure that we're all a bit like, we have our moments. God, we're lucky to live in this country at this time. Do you know what I mean? So relative to looking at the newspaper and going, well, they're 80% of the population on this planet is having a fucking horrible time most of the time and really struggling. And have we reached a stage where we're too comfortable? Probably. But yeah, am I happy? Yeah, in most ways I am, and I'm certainly not going to sit around and mope around and be unhappy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I know what I want to do, and that's what I'm doing. And yeah, some days you're like, oh my God, I'd rather not bother with anything today. But I think that's just a natural thing as well, isn't it? Sort of part of life. So, but generally, yes, I'm, if I look, occasionally I will get a flash of objectivity about my own life. And I'll be like, wow, I don't work for anyone. I work for myself. I'm making music. I've always wanted to make music. I've always just wanted to be in a room of instruments. I've got a room of instruments. And are there more things I want to do with all of those? Work and music and life? Of course, yeah. But am I on the right road to feeling like I'm slightly fulfilled? Yeah. I think so. So, and maybe that is what happiness is, I think what happiness can be is, if you're doing something and you're like, oh, I need to try and remember this because this is great. And it can be anything. I've got flashes of walking our first dog, Lumi, in like the middle of like June in this field that we used to walk. And it was just the most beautiful day. No wind, really hot. She was just loving it, jumping through the grass. And I remember just watching her joy and going, this is what happiness is. Like, watching happiness. You know what I mean? And obviously dogs are amazing because they're mostly really happy. So because they're just responding to whatever's happening, you're like, wow, like they're not thinking about, oh God, you know what? This is okay, but you know, I really wish that it had happened last. You know what I mean? They're just like, this is pure joy. So yeah, I think animals are quite good in that way because you can be like, well, they're just having the best day of their life. So yeah, and I think, you know, what is happiness is like, I don't know, what are we all trying to find? Validation. I think that's a word that has been coming up. Is like, yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts, like I'm sure you do, but quite a lot of mine are kind of comedians as well, and it's like they're always kind of joking. It's like, well, you know, we're doing this job because we're trying to get validation because we didn't get it from our father when we were growing up or whatever. So we have to go out and we have to stand on a stage and do something, and people clap and we go, oh, I feel alive now. Do you know what I mean? It's quite a weird thing when you break it down to like, what are we doing? Why are we standing on the stage? Why are we making music? What are we doing? But it is about validation, and validation from others, of course. Validation from ourselves, going, I've wanted to do this and now I'm doing it. Or I'll tell you what I have occasionally is I'll have a day, you know, when you've had a really good day and it's all just been, it's all been cool and fun and maybe healthy, and it's been a good day. You've done the gym, you've had really good food, you've managed to have a nap, you've done something really productive, you've done something creative, you've hung out with some people that you love, whatever. And you're like, wow, like if every day was like that, that would just be like, that would be the perfect life. Do you know what I mean? And like the perfect, because you'd be super healthy every day if you did that one. Like you'll go to the gym sometimes and you'll have the best workout and you're like, well, if I did that every day, like, wow, I'd be much better. Do you know what I mean? So I think the fact that we can even have flashes of like that's been the best day means that we're kind of on track to what we're trying to do. Whereas, and how blessed are we that we're not hunting for squirrels up a tree for dinner tonight, and that's taken 3 days to find food, and we're not in a war zone and no one's trying to kill us, and do you know what I mean? So it's like, obviously I think things are far too comfortable now, which is why fasting or doing the cold plunge or doing the sauna or not eating for 2 days or is actually like normal. I see that as normal. It's like, oh, you should never get thirsty, and well, you should never be hungry. It's like, of course we should. That's what we're made for. If we were hunting, we'd be hunting something for
days,
6 hours, 3 days.
Yeah.
We might not have water for a whole day. We might have to find some things. It's like, that's what we should be doing. And actually, it's like we're so far removed from us as animals now, so far removed to the point that it's like now we see ourselves as completely different things. It's like, obviously when people die, it's really sad because we'll miss them and whatever else, but I'll drive along and I'll see a roadkill and I'll be like, oh, fuck, man, like, shit. Like, I'll feel for that. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, but we're so far removed from death now. And like, you've only got to watch a nature program and it's just death everywhere, every day. I kill you, something else kills that kills that. We're all just trying to survive. That's it. It's just that now we're in a state where survival's like money related and job related. You know, it's not just like, you're not just judged on how well you can hunt and, you know, provide for yourself. because it's all sort of changed now, isn't it? I think so.
Yeah.
But don't get me started on that, because that's a whole other 3 hours.
Tell me about it. Thank you, Stephen.
Pleasure.
That was really nice to have a conversation with you.
Thank you for having me. I hope I wasn't completely waffling.